Hey, my name is Steve. I thought I'd make a quick video about what I'm working on here. I'm up in St. Charles, really hot day today, but let me get started. So, what I've got here is an engine from a 2006 GSXR 1000. I've got it apart and I've done some changes to it, but the reason it's apart, it was running fine, is somehow this balancer shaft, which would go here, was starved for oil, and you can see it's ruined the cases. It's ruined all the bearings. The bearings started to spin around and made a ton of noise. Fortunately, my brother, who's a lot more experienced than I am, was on, and he was able to recognize it, shut everything off, and we didn't do catastrophic damage, but we can no longer run a balancer shaft. Cases are ruined, and I don't want to buy new cases. Everything else is fine. So what I did was I took the crank. It's sitting in its old bearings. There's a little bit of oil, so I can show it to you, but this is not what a stock crank would look like. You can see it's been polished. It's had material taken off of it to lighten it. It's had a little work in the oil galleries or galleys, and I've had the gear removed that would be here to turn this balancer shaft. So it's perfectly straight. It's balanced. It's ready to go. So it's in here. So what I'm going to do is when I put this in, I'm going to loosen up these bearings. The stock bearings are really tight. Obviously, when you buy a bike and ride on the street, you want it to last as long as you can. In race applications, you can get a little looser. It puts a little risk. It works. It reduces the durability, but it adds horsepower. So loosening the bearings adds a few horsepower. Here's the cylinders. I just got this back from Yoshimura, and the reason I sent it to them was everything was fine, but they've learned on these engines, these 05, 06 engines, that this size hole typically runs in between all the cylinders, and then hopefully I have the camera lined up and you can see. And I sent it to them, and they've actually created these bigger passageways that look like an upside down house in between the cylinders and machined all that out. It's absolutely beautiful what they did, and that allows more pressure to flow between the pistons and gives you 3 or 4 or 5 more horsepower depending. And so I'm really impressed with what they did, and I really love it. All the cylinders are honed and ready to go. One thing they did teach me is I've always used these rotary Scotch-Brite pads on a little air-powered orbital, and honestly, don't ever do that like I did, because it takes out, the aluminum's too soft for that. So what they taught me is they do razor blade and so forth. They kind of do it the old-fashioned way when they take off the old gas material, but they use like emery cloth on a piece of granite. And what you can see here is you can see the matte finish where the emery cloth was, and then the shiny parts are where there's a low spot. You could never feel this in your hand, but you can see it. And so this creates a lot of problems, because you can see there's a shiny kind of area, low spot between this water galley and the cylinder. Well, imagine, I'm going to be over 14-to-1 compression. It wouldn't be hard for that pressure to open up if this were, if this weren't perfectly flat together with the head, and make a problem for me, maybe leak water or whatever. They say this should be fine, but lesson learned. So don't ever do that. Here's the head. Got this back. I love looking at this stuff. I did this before. I bought this and actually did the valves before myself. But these are their top retainers for their the top of the valve springs, and it has their actual intake springs and uses the stock exhaust springs. But these are great. They're titanium. They're ventilated. They're really cool looking. And it allows the bike to rev a little higher. All that kind of stuff. It's really cool looking. Here's the exhaust ports that they worked on. They look great. They're not cast. When you get them stock, they look rough like this and cast, and you can see that their work took a little material off of the valve guides. And we did a valve job because I did the same thing with those rotary buffers I was telling you about. I had a little risk. I had some low spots in this, so they decked this down probably 20 thousandths, which is interesting because you'll see here that that actually continues to raise at least the intake valves above the deck head. So that's interesting. It shows you how careful you got to be about degreeing everything. Here's the intake ports. They look great. They've all had some material removed. They're really perfect, matched, shiny. Great work by them, which is what you'd expect. So I've got that back. Just a little tip is I built a shipping crate for them, and this is just housing insulation from Corning, styrofoam, and you can make yourself a real nice case with a glue gun and get everything really protected so you can mail it back and forth. Here's a piston. I mark everything. Here's this Yoshimura race piston, and this is the rod as they came out. So I've weighed all the pistons without rings. I weighed all the rods without the pistons. They all weigh exactly the same. Pistons all weigh the same, which is what you expect. I'll loosen these bearings up in here. These have new piston pins and so forth, and I soda blasted these pistons and cleaned them all up, and they have new just stock Suzuki rings. Here's the fuel pump, for example. This is a Yoshimura fuel pump that's higher fuel flow, which, believe it or not, when you really get these things going, some of the stock fuel pumps can't really keep up with the pressure that you want or need. So I've got that. There's the starter. Some people take that out and bump start their bikes. That's not something I do, but that saves some weight if you want to get that radical. Here's the area where obviously the transmission will go. These are your little shifting forks. Here's your barrel where these things snap in as you shift and rotate this. You know, it moves your gears back and forth. I usually, when I take these things apart, I put new springs and so forth in here so you keep a nice, good, stiff feel when you're shifting. It's got a new oil pump. Since I'm in here right now, this oil pump's been running for 5 or 6 years, so it's got a little scarred up. So I put a new one in. This is actually a different gear than the stock gear that actually drives the fuel pump a little faster, make a little more oil pressure. Here's the transmission. I went through all the bearings. You know, everything looks great. You check to make sure that you're not having any God, you know, forbid that you're missing any teeth, but anything's really beat up or ground off, or you're having problems. Everything looks really good within spec. Even first gears, worn a little, but it's fine. And then here's you'll see that these come from the factory, like most bikes today, where these are undercut. So when you're under power, it tends to hold the gears together. So everything looks good here. There's nothing I'm going to do to this transmission kit, or I'm not going to change any gears. You can buy different gears from Yoshimura depending on where you are and all that stuff. But I don't get involved in any of that and change ratios or so forth. So that looks fine. So that'll go together. And the process will be, I'll drop the 4 pistons in here. I'll flip this over, and then I'll torque. Or then I'll put the new bearings in here. I'll set the crank in here. Then I'll have the big end, and I'll get all the big ends, and I'll torque the big end rods to the crank, and then stretch the bolts however many degrees in the manual. Then I'll put this case on, and I'll torque that down, and then I'll start to build up from there and follow the steps in the manual. I think in that case will go on, and then all the transmission parts will go in, and then that case will go on. So I'll start building up from there. I've got this stand down here I could use. I could bolt it in once I get to that point for decking or for putting the head on and degreeing the cams. I made this stand. I like it. It works. It can hold it. I've got a Yoshimura offset, pretty deep fuel or oil pan. This thing works great. So you can do fun stuff like this and make yourself an engine stand that you can use to hold the motor when you're degreeing things. What's great about Yoshimura, since they're a big Suzuki shop, they make all kinds of stuff you can pick up from them. Like this is their degree wheel, and these look like this pointer. Instead of trying to make up something, this thing bolts exactly on a location on one of the engine bolts, or probably on a little bolt that holds down the outer pieces of the head. And you can bolt this on and line it up, everything. So they've got all the little parts and pieces that make this a little easier. But I'll get the cams on. I'll degree them. Because we deck the head, I'll make sure that when the piston's closest to the open valves, that you can have a little tool. You can push that valve open even more. See when it touches the piston. Make sure that it's no closer than a certain distance. I can't remember what that might be for me. I don't know if it's 20 thousandths or 15 thousandths or something. And because the decks, I've got took some material off the head. I'll make sure I check all that. Here's a lot of the pieces and parts. I've got a 4-into-1 exhaust. I like to mark these headers with this like white heat-resistant pen. So when I put this together, it saves me a little time. I know the order. Here's a full gasket kit for that bike. I'll take this head gasket. There's a way I can peel that apart and do some tricks. Yoshimura taught me to actually make that gasket act like a thin gasket. Stock radiator, it's a little damaged, but it works fine. I don't ride the bike hard enough to keep it at super high RPM, so I haven't had a temperature problem. But I could get a bigger radiator, I could get a bigger oil cooler, and I could make sure that, like you see on the real race bikes, they need a lot of cooling. So that's always an option. Here's the forks. These are, pretty much the top line Olin forks. They're great. So those are ready to go. You can see how I organize some things, even though I look generally disorganized. I keep all the shims and everything organized, so when I go back together I can start with those same shims and check clearance between the cams and the top of the valve covers. Here's the stainless steel Brembo rotors. These are, I think, 330 millimeters or something. I take orbital with some sandpaper and I deglaze them and run them around, and that usually works really good, and then clean them up. So those will go on with titanium bolts. I've got some cast magnesium rims. I've got some carbon fiber rims, so I can go put those on, and I've got different sprocket sizes and so forth that you can see there. There's the little radiator cooler. These are billet made out of one piece of aluminum Brembo brakes. These are more their endurance pads because they have just one pin that goes through here. You can pop this pin off and these pads fall right out. These are HRC's pads. They work great. These will get all cleaned up. These little titanium ventilated little pucks, you got to be real careful those don't come out because they're hard to get in. They have to be perfectly square to fit in. So I'll get new brake lines, clean all this up. All this will be good. Here's the Brembo. The Brembo master cylinder. I'll get all that done and cleaned up. Here's the frame. This has a Öhlins rear shock. It's actually got a titanium spring on it, which I don't think anybody uses anymore. I found that over time the spring, I think, loses a little bit of its where you wish it were. Whatever its Newton meters or whatever whatever its resistance is. But it works fine for me. It's light, and like I said, I'm not that big. I'm that good at it, so I'll leave that on and I enjoy it. I don't have any titanium axles or swing arm bolts except for the front. I had to have a custom titanium axle made because with those Öhlins Superbike forks, the stock axle won't work. So I had to, and in the same vein, I had to get a different triple clamp to hold those bigger forks. So I've got that. I've got the stock tack. I've got the Yoshimura wiring loom, which is removes all of the consumer stuff that would be for your brake lights or your turn signals. All that stuff is off, so that saves a few pounds in copper, believe it or not. I keep a hour meter up in here. When I take the seat off, I can see, here's the battery in case I want to recharge it, and then I can see how many hours the bike's run if I want to keep track of that. I have a hydraulic Brembo clutch master cylinder I put on, which this bike doesn't come with a hydraulic clutch, but I like it, so I've got that on. And I like these clip-ons because you can, with that hinge there, you can take these off without having to monkey with the forks. So that's going to all be ready and go back together. I've got titanium pretty much everywhere I could get it. You'll see all these little bolts are titanium. The nut for the axle's titanium. A lot of the stuff it's a couple $1,000 worth of titanium, but it adds up. Another thing a lot of people do these days is, here's your stock typical battery. It's very heavy lead, as you'd expect. There's batteries out there that are made of kind of same chemistry, I think, that are used in laptops and so forth. So they got a lot of energy, but they're a lot lighter. So a lot of people use those these days. So the way that I explained how this will all go back together. So I'm looking forward to going that direction. I've got, if you can see up here, I've got some Honda body parts, but I've got all the Suzuki body parts have all been freshly cleaned up, painted white, and clear coated. So those are pretty much ready. I've got a lot of other little parts and pieces in case I have missing little bolts and stuff. A lot of just kits of metric stuff. So that's the status of this bike. And then I've got this other Honda I've worked on. And it had a lot of miles. It looked like it was wrecked. I got it at a really good price. Took the engine apart, and I read up. I got the HRC specs. Did some of the ventilating in the cases, like what we did here on the Suzuki. I did some of that. It's the kind of thing you can do if you're just going to do track days. It's not legal in a lot of the classes unless you're doing like just kind of an open class. And then pistons, rings, HRC cams, power commander. All titanium Akrapovic exhaust, different front brakes. These are more the latest generation Brembo front rotors. This is a cast but monoblock caliper they offer now. That's less expensive than the actual billet one. They work fantastic. I love it. We've got titanium bolts in here. I've got a Brembo master cylinder. There's a way to disassemble this area right here, believe it or not, and you can get one of the less expensive remote adjusters and fix this up for yourself and have a remote adjuster. This has your front brake protector. It's all popular these days. This was a custom top triple clamp where I actually had motocross kind of handlebar risers on here, and you can see some of the handlebars I tried, and I didn't really like it that much. It was kind of fun. It was looked like a naked bike, but I've since gone back and I put these Woodcraft normal handlebars on there. So that bike's good. It's got a new chain and everything like that. It runs great. It's really fresh. I've got little things I got to work on that, but that bike's a lot of fun. It's probably 170 horse or so. Since I took the Honda steering damper that fits in here off, I had to find one and rig it up in here. You can see I've got this one from Toby in here, and it works fine. So that bike's probably 170 horsepower, runs pretty well. It's got a couple of things I got to work out. You can see I was running it a naked bike and I just taped in this bladder where the intake is. But now that I'll put regular fairing on, I've got the intakes and stuff like that, and that tape will come off there. The Suzuki should be about around 190 horse or so. This Honda's, stock weight. The Suzuki should weigh about 380 with a gallon of gas in it, which is great. It could come down a little more if I took the starter off and did a few more tricks, but I'm not going to do that. There you have it. I thought I'd just make this quick video, let you know what's going on, see the progress, see what I'm working on, and hope you enjoyed it.